Hello, hunters, and welcome back to another tale of beast nights, to another tale of blood. Yharnam is a city shaped by the will of creatures beyond the stars, beings that could be called gods, and yet that word does not quite fit them, because gods, as men imagine them, do not weep. The great ones can. And that single detail, small as it seems, changes everything about what they are. They are above humanity in ways that the human mind was never built to measure. And yet, they are not untouchable, not complete. They carry within them something that reaches downward, toward the lesser beings that crawl beneath them. And that reaching has never brought them anything but loss. Tonight, we speak of the beings who started this saga and sealed its end within an eternal nightmare. The ones whose blood ran through Yharnam streets and through its people, feeding an obsession that promised elevation and delivered something far closer to damnation. The ones who were worshipped, the ones who were studied, the ones who were pursued and mourned, sometimes all at once, by the hunters and scholars and madmen who could not leave them alone. Tonight, we speak of the great ones. The great ones. To call them gods is the easiest thing and also the most incomplete. They are beings from beyond the known world, existing across planes that human senses were never built to perceive. They have power that bends reality. They have presence that breaks minds, and yet they weep. They lose children. They reach toward lesser beings with something that looks, from a distance, almost like longing. That contradiction is at the heart of everything Yharnam became. The scholars of Bergenworth found them first, or perhaps it is more accurate to say the great ones allowed themselves to be found. Deep within the ancient labyrinth of the Thumaru, men sent to search for truth encountered something their minds were not built to hold. An academy was raised to study what was discovered there, and the truth, as it turned out, was a thing that ate slowly at whoever carried it. Awful things happened at Bergenworth. The church sealed the forest afterward and called it forbidden, which is the word people use when they find something they cannot explain and cannot survive. The confusion surrounding the great ones begins with the question of what they actually are, and that confusion has never fully been resolved. The kin, those humans reshaped by contact with Great One knowledge, carry enough strangeness in their forms that telling them apart from true Great Ones requires more certainty than most observers possess. Both appear alien. Both carry power beyond ordinary measure. The line between a true Great One and an extraordinarily elevated kin is one that even the most learned minds in Yharnam could not always draw cleanly. What separates them at the deepest level is this: the kin were human once. The great ones were never anything so small. They exist across multiple planes at once. They are ageless, though not unkillable, Their powers take shapes the human world has no proper names for, ranging from the ability to fold space, to command nightmares, to shatter sanity with nothing more than a stare. Even perceiving them clearly demands something from the mind, a quality called insight, the kind of knowing that Master Willem pursued until it cost him everything. Among them, certain names carry more weight than others. The Moon Presence, creator of the hunter's dream, and the nightmare that holds the hunter captive. Odin, who has gone so far beyond physical form that he exists now only as a voice and an influence, formless and perhaps timeless, the most powerful and the most removed of all his kind, and the only one the records name as male. Ram, who hides truths behind a veil the world cannot see past. Amygdala, perched atop the buildings of Yharnam, watching with eyes that bulge when they burn. Ebrietas, left behind, reaching upward towards something that left without her. Murgo's wet nurse, standing guard over a crying that never stops. The brain of Mensis, staring from the dark until the mind catches fire. And then there is the grief that runs through all of them. Every great one has lost a child. This is not a detail at the edge of their story. It is the center of it. The stronger a living thing becomes, the fewer offspring it can produce, and the great ones sit at a height where that cost becomes absolute. They lose what they made, and they cannot replace it. And so they reach downward, toward the world below them, drawn to the young and the special and the vulnerable. The pale blood moon rises as part of this reaching, an attempt to find a surrogate, to fill a silence that has been with them longer than Yharnam has existed. They caused the scourge, the contaminated blood traced back to the labyrinth. Whether they intended the plague, or simply left something behind that humanity was not ready to touch, the result was the same. Yharnam was built on that contact, and Yharnam burned for it. They can be divided into three broad kinds: true great ones, kin great ones, and the failed great ones, which may be the most painful category of all. Those who reached toward something higher and did not fully arrive. They are what came before success, the prototypes, the ones the church looked at and decided were not enough, and then kept anyway. Perhaps because throwing them away entirely felt like admitting something too plainly. The living failures stand in the Lumenwood garden, tending flowers in a state that sits somewhere between purpose and vacancy. Their heads have melted into their bodies, all facial features gone, absorbed into the bulk of what they became. Their skin carries a pale blue hue. Their limbs have stretched beyond what the bodies beneath them were built to support. They move, and they reach, and they cast. But the sense of intention behind any of it is difficult to locate. They are the church's earliest attempt at what would eventually become the celestial emissary. The research hall sits close enough to the Lumenwood garden the connection between the two requires no great leap. These creatures came out of the same line of experimentation, the same drive to push human bodies past the boundary of what they were, and into something that could reach the cosmos. The old blood was used. The procedures were carried out. And what emerged was this: humanoid shapes with bulbous leathery heads and stretched bodies, more or less mindless, capable of violence, but not of the directed cosmic purpose the Church needed from them. They come in two forms. The arcane variant keeps its distance, throwing slow arcane orbs outward, either in small homing clusters or as a single large explosive mass. The brute variant closes in, flailing arms and leading with its head, a more direct and less considered approach to everything. Neither variant suggests a mind behind the action, so much as a body that has been given something to do and does it without understanding why. And yet, they are not without power. During their battle, they reach upward, individually drawing partial and cloudy representations of the stars into the space around them. Together, they can hold that opening longer, bringing meteors down in a shared effort that mirrors, in a crude and chaotic way, what the celestial emissaries would later do with far greater precision. They can touch the cosmos. They simply cannot do anything with the contact that serves the Church's purpose. The knowledge, if any reaches them, finds nothing in their vacuous state capable of receiving it and passing it on. They are labeled kin of the cosmos. That classification sits strangely alongside the word failure. Kin of the cosmos implies a genuine connection, a real relationship to something vast and beyond human origin. And they do have that connection, however limited and ungoverned it is. What makes them failures is not that they reached nothing. It is that they reached something and came back empty, unable to bring any of it down into a form the Church could use. They stand in the garden. They tend the flowers. They open small windows into the sky that let in light and meteors and nothing else. A monument to how far the Church was willing to go and how little distance that turned out to be. The name itself is a statement of intent. Celestial, meaning of the sky, of the cosmos, of the space between stars. Emissary, meaning one sent on behalf of another, a representative dispatched to bridge a distance. Put them together, and the purpose becomes plain. These creatures were built to speak on behalf of humanity, to something that humanity could not reach on its own. That they exist at all is the end result of a long and brutal road. The earliest attempts by the healing Church to make contact with the Great Ones began with water. In those early days, the Great Ones were associated with the ocean, and the Church's approach was as direct as it was desperate. Patients were made to drink great quantities of water, heads bound, eyes covered, listening for the howl of the sea, for the voice of something beyond the horizon of human understanding. The water they swallowed was not simply ingested. It rode inside their heads, the first crude attempt at building something like internal eyes, a new way of perceiving what ordinary senses could not reach. The process was agonizing. The patients' heads expanded under the pressure of what was filling them. Those found in the research halls begged to be ended, convinced they had done something unforgivable to deserve what was being done to them. Most did not survive. Their bodies were cast into the acidic pool at the foot of the stairs, dissolved, and the procedure began again on whoever came next. The church kept records of its failures, the same way it kept everything else. Quietly, behind closed doors, in rooms the public was never meant to see. Lady Maria oversaw these early experiments, and the patients regarded her as something close to a mother. That detail carries a particular kind of weight, given what was being done to them under her supervision. She was not without care. She assigned the patients who showed the most potential to tend the lumenwood flowers growing in the shadow of the clock tower, believing the scent might offer them some comfort, might quiet the agony enough for them to think and listen more clearly. It was a small mercy offered inside a situation that had no mercy in its design. Her greatest success was still called a failure. The living failures stand outside her home in the astral clock tower, tending the large lumenwood flowers in a state that looks more like haunting than gardening, as we of course touched upon. Whether their minds were emptied by the transformation, leaving them unable to carry knowledge back from whatever they briefly brush against, or whether the chaos of their cosmic reach is itself the reason they were deemed failures, the result is the same. They stand in the garden and tend the flowers, and occasionally tear open a piece of the sky, and none of it amounts to what the church was reaching for. Maria died without seeing the success she gave everything to find. The living failures remained in the garden, tending flowers, opening small windows into the cosmos that let in nothing useful, a monument to how far the church was willing to go and how little it received in return. Water had failed. The heads it filled, the bodies it broke, the patients it killed, none of it produced what the church needed. The connection to the great ones was real, but water alone could only gesture toward it. It could not open the door, and yet the church did not stop. It never stopped. A brain fluid item carries a memory that points towards something the failed water experiments had missed entirely. Once, a young girl had an older brother who was determined to become a doctor, and so she willfully became his patient. In the end, this led to their encounter with the eldritch truth, for which they considered themselves blessed. We failed to realize our own latent potential until the moment it is lost, and we sense its absence. This description changes the shape of the problem. The capacity to make contact with the eldritch truth is not something that needs to be built from the outside. It is already present in humans, buried, waiting. The young girl reached it not through water or eyes or any of the church's instruments, but through something already inside her. And the closing line is the one that matters most. That potential does not last. It fades, strongly implied to happen somewhere in adolescence, and once it is gone, it cannot be recovered. The church, reading this, arrived at an obvious and disturbing conclusion. The window was childhood. The orphanage in the Upper Cathedral Ward was founded around this understanding. Children's minds are unformed, their imaginations vivid, their bodies still open to what the world presses into them. They are susceptible in ways that adults have already been sealed against. And orphans, specifically, were chosen for they were the most vulnerable members of Yharnam society. No caregivers to ask questions, no one to notice an absence or grieve a loss. The church may well have presented the orphanage as a shelter, a safe place for children with nowhere else to go, a refuge from the beasts and the blood-soaked nights. What it actually was sat in the shadow of the grand cathedral and called itself scholarship. The orphans who entered became what the church's own language describes as potent, unseen thinkers. Potent means their abilities reached a plane beyond anything ordinary humanity possessed. Unseen means the public of Yharnam was never meant to know what was being made of these children. Both words together describe an institution that understood exactly what it was doing and had decided the doing of it was worth any cost. While the orphanage was being established, the church was also pursuing a separate line of inquiry that would eventually intersect with it. Phantasms. These small slug-like creatures, found throughout the chalice dungeons as traces of Great One presence, were known to be their augurs, their heralds, their closest physical representatives in the world below. The body of Kos had been riddled with them. The connection between phantasms and Great Ones was intimate in a way that water and eyes had never managed to be. Where the earlier experiments tried to reshape humans into something capable of reaching upward, phantasms offered something different. A thing already native to the space between humanity and the Great Ones, already moving in both directions, already carrying something of the cosmic in its small and unremarkable form. The orphanage came first. The choir, which grew from the phantasm experiments, came after. But both lines of inquiry were running at the same time, each one reaching toward the same goal from a different direction, each one willing to use whatever was available, including children with no one to speak for them. Long before the cerebral patients, before the water and the expanding heads, and the acid pool at the foot of the stairs, Bergenworth had already caught a glimpse of what they were reaching toward. Looking into a soft eye, blessed by a phantasm, revealed a vast stretch of dark sky rumbling with an endless meteor storm. The cosmos, visible through something small enough to hold in a hand. The discovery led nowhere at the time, but the idea it planted did not die with the scholars who first encountered it. It traveled forward into the minds of those who would eventually build the healing church, and it waited. The church picked up where Bergenworth had left off. Rituals and rites built around phantasms, using pearl slugs, juvenile phantasms, as their material. Through these experiments, the church managed to reach a lofty plane of darkness, the kind of vast dark sky the black sky eye reveals, a stretch of cosmos that opened briefly before them. But no great one answered from the outer reaches. What the rite produced instead was a small exploding star, a gesture towards something that did not gesture back. The rite was named a call beyond, which describes it honestly. A call that went out and received no reply. But the church kept working with phantasms, and the next attempt went further than anyone had anticipated. Using them in a more focused ritual, the church managed to partially summon a great one from the land of Iz into humanity's plane of existence. Ebrietas came through, incomplete but present, more real than anything the previous experiments had managed to produce. That partial summoning changed everything. It proved the distance could be crossed. It opened the question of what lay in Iz, and what else might be reachable from within the old labyrinth. The choir was formed from this moment, drawn from the upper ranks of the healing church, operating separately from the school of Mensis, seeing themselves as a formal delegation to the Great Ones. Their base was the upper cathedral ward, the same ground where the orphanage stood, where the astral clock tower cast its shadow, where the cerebral patience had already been broken and dissolved. The great Is chalice, found within the labyrinths, and the first such chalice brought to the surface since Bergenworth's time, allowed the choir to go further still. Through it, they reached the land of Is directly, and stood before Ebrietas in full. What they found when they got there was not the triumphant breakthrough they had imagined. Ebrietas was not a gateway to the other great ones. She was as cut off from them as humanity was, searching the same sky for the same signs, reaching toward a greatness that had moved beyond her reach. The choir garb speaks to what came next. Together with the left behind Great One, they look to the skies in search of astral signs that may lead them to the rediscovery of true greatness. Two abandoned things, one human institution, and one stranded Great One, looking upward together for something neither of them could find alone. Then came the epiphany, sudden, accidental, and reshaping everything that followed. Here we stand, feet planted in the earth, but might the cosmos be very near us, only just above our heads? The cosmos were not distant. They were not somewhere beyond the reach of any instrument the church could build. They were on a different plane, placed immediately above the world of Yharnam, close enough that the right eyes could perceive them if the right eyes could be made. The hunter's nightmare makes this architecture of layered reality visible in its most direct form. An enemy from the fishing hamlet drops from the sky into the river of blood below. Ascending the astral clock tower deposits the hunter directly into the hamlet, a layer of reality sitting physically above the nightmare. The cosmos follow the same logic. Right above the heads of Yharnam's people, on a plane they lacked the perception to access. The sky and the cosmos are one. Knowing this and acting on it were different problems. The church had a destination, but no way to reach it, a truth they could state, but not substantiate. What they needed was something that could cross the distance on their behalf. A representative, a being built specifically to move between humanity's plane and the one just above it, to make contact where human minds could not follow. No such being existed. So the church looked at the children in the orphanage and decided to make one. Everything the church had learned across its long history of failure, the water experiments, the eye lining, the phantasm rituals, the partial summoning of ebrietas, the discovery that the cosmos sat just above their heads on a plane they could not naturally access. All of it converged in the orphanage. The celestial emissaries were the result. The old blood, likely drawn from Ebrietas herself, provided the foundation. The blue elixir served as something closer to an instrument of crossing, rather than a simple anesthetic. It dulls the brain, yes, numbing it enough for the procedures to be carried out, but it does something stranger than that. It partially dissolves the physical presence of whoever takes it, thinning the boundary between the plane they occupy and the one just beyond it. In that thinned state, the work of transformation could proceed in ways it could not on a fully present, fully resistant human body. The children of the orphanage were given the elixir, and then whatever came next was carried out on minds and bodies that were already halfway somewhere else. The emissaries that emerged were, by the church's standards, a success. Their heads had swelled beyond human proportion, but not with water this time. With eyes. The same aspiration that drove Willem, the same understanding that more eyes meant more planes of perception, had finally been realized in a form that held together. Where the cerebral patience had expanded and burst and died, and where the garden of eyes had produced madness and ruin, the emissaries arrived at something that functioned. They can reach the cosmos. Their use of a call beyond carries a precision the church's earlier attempts never managed, the stars affixing themselves in place around their heads, rather than detonating without direction. They emit a sound that sits outside the range of ordinary human language, something inhuman and continuous, reminiscent of the emanations the cerebral patients had spent their agonized existence listening for. The great ones produce such sounds without apparent intention, and the emissaries carry the same quality, broadcasting outward without conscious effort, as though the transformation built transmission into them at a level below thought. The boss that stands among them controls the smaller emissaries, bending their will toward its own, coordinating them in ways that mirror how the living failures work together to hold the cosmos open during their battle. There is a collective intelligence operating through them, distributed but directed, the larger presence using the smaller ones as extensions of a single reaching gesture. Their primary purpose was always the one their name describes: to go where humanity could not, to stand at the threshold between Yharnam's plane and the one just above it, and to speak on behalf of those who had built them. A secondary purpose may have been bridging the communication between ebrietas and the choir, giving the left behind Great One a way to reach across the distance more reliably than phantasms alone allowed. But beneath both purposes ran the same drive that had been running through the church since its earliest experiments with water and bound heads and the sound of the sea. The rediscovery of true greatness. The great ones who had left. The cosmos that sat just out of reach. The emissaries were the church's most refined answer to a question it had been asking long before most of Yharnam's current residents had been born. Whether they ever found what they were sent to find is a question the Upper Cathedral Ward answers in its own way. The emissaries still wander its halls, still reaching, still broadcasting into a silence that has not yet answered back. At the surface, it looks like a creature, but it is an accumulation, a colossal mass of decayed and misshapen body parts assembled into something that moves and acts and defends, with a single giant humanoid torso riding atop the whole of it like a conductor over an orchestra. The other parts of its body move with their own independent life, as though the things that were gathered to make it never fully surrendered their separate existences and simply learned to share a direction. It waits in Advent Plaza, placed there after Rom's barrier falls, and the path to the nightmare of Mensis opens. It is the school of Mensis standing between what they have built and anyone who would interrupt it. The One Reborn came from a ritual, an unholy Thumerian rite that used the bodies of Yharnam's people as its material, drawing them together into a single unliving thing through means the bells made possible. The bells of the Thumerian labyrinth were built to reach into other worlds and pull beings from them, and the bell maidens ring them here in mass, simultaneously their combined ringing coalescing multiple summoned presences into one horrible shape all at once. What they became in the coalescing is settled plainly enough by looking at it. The beings gathered to form the One Reborn may not have come willingly. Ordinary bell summoning calls only those willing to cross between worlds, but the Thumerians may have possessed methods for compelling the crossing that ordinary humans do not. If that is the case, then the One Reborn is not a guardian in any intentional sense. It is a collection of things pulled from wherever they were and forced into a shared body, lashing out at whatever is closest. Because pain and horror are the only things it has left to express. The alternative reading is no less disturbing. The beings summoned may have been willing fanatics, devotees of the school of Mensis, waiting in a parallel dimension, specifically to be called upon as a final defense. Their loyalty surviving even the crossing and the merging. If any sentience remains in the mass, it may be the combined will of those fanatics pressing outward, protecting the scholars whose work they gave everything to serve. The inhuman utterances the One Reborn produces for its spells could support this reading, as members of Mensis with knowledge of such incantations might carry that knowledge even through the transformation of being merged into something like this. There is also the matter of what the One Reborn was originally meant to be before it became a last line of defense. The experiment that produced it was aimed at something far more ambitious, an attempt to elevate humanity to the status of a great one, to gather enough of the human into a single ascending mass that the result would cross the threshold the individual never could. By that measure, the one reborn is not a weapon. It is a failure of ascension, the same category of outcome as the living failures, something that reached toward a higher plane and arrived at something monstrous instead. It burns. Fire and bolt tear through it in ways that arcane does not, which sits strangely for something built from a cosmic ritual, as though the parts gathered to make it retained enough of their human vulnerability to be undone by the things that have always undone human flesh. The school of Mensis built something abominable, even by their own standards, and saved it for the moment when someone came close enough to make them desperate. That it exists at all is a measure of how far they were willing to go to protect what they had made in the nightmare above. They are everywhere, and most of Yharnam never knew it. Perched atop the high walls and buildings of the city, long-limbed and still, the amygdala have been watching over Yharnam for longer than its people have had names for what they were seeing. Their bodies are spider-like in shape, moving on reptilian talons, their 7 arms ending in 6-fingered hands. Their heads bear an unsettling resemblance to a part of the human brain that carries the same name, the part responsible for fear, for memory, for the processing of things that leave a mark. Whether that resemblance is coincidence or something more deliberate is a question the records do not answer. Their eyes are many, and they bulge when they burn with arcane power. Among all the great ones, the amygdala appear to be among the most widely worshipped. Statues of them line the cathedral ward and Yharnam. A larger shrine to one stands within the church of the Hypogene jail. The school of Mensis built their image into the architecture itself. One amygdala made its home in the nightmare frontier, in a place known as Amygdala's Chamber. It drew followers to it, among them a worshipper who sent tributes to his god regularly, transporting them into the nightmare as offerings. When the hunter eventually slays this amygdala, the worshipper expresses nothing resembling grief. He believes his god was given salvation. That reading says something about the nature of devotion in Yharnam, where the line between offering and being offered was never entirely clear. What the amygdala truly wants is uncertain. The great ones are said to be sympathetic toward humanity by nature, and the amygdala's constant presence above the city, watchful and still, may be exactly that. A vigil, a form of guardianship that humanity, lacking the insight to perceive it clearly, mistook for something more threatening, or simply failed to perceive at all. The lesser amygdala, smaller and distinct from the true one, remain invisible to most hunters until their minds have opened far enough to hold what they are seeing. Only with sufficient insight, or under the pale light of the blood moon, do they become visible. Whether the lesser amygdala are servants of the true one, the same kind of being at a different scale, or something stranger still, an extension of a single presence distributed across multiple forms, remains unanswered. Like all great ones, the amygdala is flesh and bone beneath its strangeness. It has lived through more of humanity's history than humanity itself can remember. And like all great ones, it can be killed, which raises its own quiet questions about what it means to be a god in Yharnam, where even the divine can bleed. There are things in the nightmare that inspire awe. The brain of Mensis inspires something closer to dread that has no clean name for it. It is massive, a creature that resembles nothing so much as a brain in its raw form, covered entirely in eyes, dragging itself with a long, twisted arm that ends in a beastly clawed hand. It does not need to move to destroy a hunter. It only needs to look. The frenzy that greets any hunter arriving in the nightmare of Mensis for the first time does not come from a weapon or a spell. It comes from that gaze, pressing against the mind from a distance, igniting something inside it that burns until there is nothing left. The school of Mensis found it and chose to leave it there. They discovered what it was. They understood that its gaze drove mortals to lethal madness. And they stayed anyway, because what they also found was this. The brain was lined on the inside with sacred eyes, eyes of a kind said to hold the key to evolution itself. The rot and the ruin it caused were the price of proximity to something that genuinely elevated. In the thinking of Mensis, that was a trade worth making. The brain can be brought low. A lever drops it into the abyss below the tower it overlooks, and what follows strips it of everything that made it terrible. Broken and helpless at the bottom of the dark, it can no longer harm the hunter who descends to finish it. It watches. It follows with its gaze, now harmless, now almost sorrowful. There is something in that image that lingers. A great one reduced to observing its own end with nothing left to defend itself. Eyes still open, still watching, until they go dark. The title is misleading. Ram does not resemble a spider in any way that the word usually conjures. She is vast and slow, built more like a great pill bug or a caterpillar, with a bulbous body and a silverfish tail, and from her flesh, vegetation grows. Cold blood flowers push through her as though she has been motionless long enough for the world to begin growing over her. Her head is gray and rock hard, like a chunk of pumice, covered in dull eyes that point in every direction without appearing to focus on anything. A small round mouth full of sharp teeth sits beneath them. Dark eye-like shapes mark her body alongside the flowers, and together they give her the look of something that has been changed so thoroughly that even the categories used to describe living things no longer quite fit her. She is completely docile until struck. Left alone, she simply exists, still and unbothered. But disturb her, and her children fall from the sky, summoned from somewhere above. She throws ice crystals upward that crash down from height. She conjures blasts of arcane force. If pressed hard enough, she vanishes entirely, reappearing elsewhere in the same space with a fresh group of offspring around her. Her power is real, even if her posture suggests she would rather not use it. Her name, vacuous. The word points in two directions at once, and both may be true. Either her mind has gone dark, emptied out by whatever process made her what she is, or her thoughts have traveled so far beyond what human language can reach that nothing of them can be brought back down into words. A brain that cannot communicate its contents is, from the outside, indistinguishable from a brain that has nothing left in it. What she is, beneath the title and the flowers and the dull staring eyes, is a kin of the great ones, kin of the cosmos. And the warning her defeat carries speaks directly to how she came to be. Dare not to delve into the world beyond humanity, the eldritch truth touched upon long ago at Byrgenwerth. Byrgenwerth. That name sits at the root of her origin, and Mikolash, scholar of Byrgenwerth and host of the nightmare, is the one who makes the connection most plainly.
Cause. Or some say cause. Do you hear our prayers as you once did for the vacuous Rom? Grant us eyes, grant us eyes, plant eyes on our brains to cleanse our beastly idiocy.
Kos is credited with what happened to Rom. Whatever Rom was before, whatever she became after, the ascension that carried her from human to something else runs through Kos, through the fishing hamlet, and through the hands of the scholars who went there and took what was not theirs to take. The kin are humans who crossed a threshold they were not built to cross. The evidence of this is everywhere in Yharnam. The celestial emissaries, some of them made directly by Yesofka in her clinic, are humans reshaped by old blood into something that reaches toward the cosmos. The living failures came before them, earlier attempts at the same transformation that did not quite arrive. The brain suckers still wear enough of their original human form to make what was done to them legible. Each of them is a record of what happens when a person is pushed past the boundary of what they were. The Garden of Eyes is where that record becomes most explicit. These were students and research subjects of Byrgenwerth, men and women who had their brains lined with eyes. In pursuit of the epiphany, Master Willem had built his entire life around. His reasoning was recorded in the Great One's wisdom. At Byrgenwerth, Master Willem had an epiphany. We are thinking on the basis of planes. What we need are more eyes. Human thought, in Willem's view, was limited by the organ doing the thinking. More eyes meant more planes of perception, more capacity for the kind of understanding the Great Ones possessed naturally. The Garden of Eyes shows what that reasoning produced in practice. Swollen heads bursting with new sight, bodies twisted beyond recognition, minds that did not survive the expansion intact. Their heads resemble Rom's in ways that are difficult to look past. But Rom's outcome was different, vastly different. Something in her ascension carried her somewhere the Garden of Eyes never reached, and the reason for that difference points directly back to the fishing hamlet and what the scholars brought home from it. The third umbilical cord retrieved from Yesufka speaks plainly. Provost Willem sought the cord in order to elevate his being and thoughts to those of a great one, by lining his brain with eyes, the only choice he knew, if man were to ever match their greatness. Long ago, in the fishing hamlet, the Bergenworth scholars committed blasphemy. The body of the Great One Kos was discovered and studied, along with its unborn baby. The cord of an infant Great One is a relic of enormous power. The orphan of Kos, visible in the nightmare, carries its umbilical cord and wields the placenta attached to it as a weapon. In the waking world, the scholars almost certainly took that cord, or a portion of it, from the body of Kos during their time at the hamlet. The cursed brew describes what their methods looked like when applied to the villagers themselves. Skull of a local from the violated fishing village. The inside of the skull was forcibly searched for eyes, as evidenced by innumerable scratches and indentations. These were not careful scholars following ethical inquiry. They were people who had decided the truth was worth any cost paid by anyone other than themselves. Combined with the eye lining process Willem had developed, the cord of Kos appears to be what carried Rom across the threshold the Garden of Eyes could not reach. Mikolash credits Kos directly with the ascension, and in his reading, the result had a shape he recognized. Rom had been reborn, vacuous and new, like an infant. Kos, whose child had been taken, became in that reading Rom's mother, and Rom became what the scholars had always been searching for, a surrogate child of a great one, elevated beyond humanity and placed beyond the reach of ordinary understanding. Whether Rom understood any of this is a question her silence makes impossible to answer. Rom ascended and then said nothing. That was the disappointment Willem and the scholars were left with. Whatever truth she reached in her crossing, whatever enlightenment the eyes and the cord of Kos carried her toward, none of it came back down. The record puts it plainly. The spider hides all manner of rituals, certain to reveal nothing, for true enlightenment need not be shared. Whether Rom chose silence or simply lost the architecture needed to communicate what she now knew, the result was the same. A human had gone further than any human before her, and the knowledge stopped there, sealed inside something that could no longer pass it on. By the standards of what Willem had set out to achieve, that made Rom a failure. But failure and uselessness are not the same thing, and what Rom did with her silence turned out to matter enormously. She hid the blood moon, the ritual to beckon it, the knowledge of how to draw it close, the eldritch truth it carried with it. All of it was concealed behind the barrier Rom maintained from within the Moonside Lake. Another piece of the record makes the weight of this plain. The Bergenworth spider hides all manner of rituals, and keeps our lost master from us. A terrible shame. It makes my head shudder uncontrollably. The lake itself was built for this purpose, its description stating that great volumes of water serve as a barrier, guarding sleep, and an augur of the eldritch truth, and that overcoming this barrier means claiming what is waiting on the other side. The moon was always at the center of Bergenworth's obsession. The building is filled with lunariums, instruments for tracking the moon's motion and its phases. And at its heart stands a telescope pointed permanently at the sky. The scholars knew the moon's historical significance from their study of the Thumerian civilization. They knew what the old text said. When the red moon hangs low, the line between man and beast is blurred, and when the great ones descend, a womb will be blessed with child. They understood what the moon's descent meant for the people living beneath it, and some of them wanted it anyway. The school of Mensis, rooted in Bergenworth, and among the earliest branches of the healing church, pursued the moon with a desperation the record describes as madness. And at some point, long before the present night of the hunt, they succeeded. The red moon descended over old Yharnam. The beasts took the streets. A note from that night survives in a form that carries the full dread of what it describes. When the hunt began, the healing church left us, blocking the great bridge to Cathedral Ward, as old Yharnam burned to the ground that moonlit night. The nameless moon presence, beckoned by Lawrence and his associates. Pale blood. Behold, a pale blood sky. The moon presence answered the call of Lawrence and his associates. The hunter's dream was established, and the cycle of pale blood hunters was set in motion. And the healing church, having called something down that consumed the city below them, sealed the great bridge and retreated into Cathedral Ward, leaving the people of old Yharnam to burn and turn and die beneath the moon they had beckoned. It was from that crisis that Rom's concealing role became necessary. With Yharnam burning and the red moon turning the blood drunk into beasts, someone had to hold the line against the truth descending fully. The crisis that followed the moon's descent left the church with no clean options. Old Yharnam was already burning. The beasts were already in the streets. Lawrence had summoned the moon presence, believing he could control the outcome, but his plan failed the instant it arrived. The power he sought to command was immediately unleashed beyond his grasp. It was likely this catastrophic failure that sent him back to Willem, his old master, the man whose life's work had produced the one being capable of doing what needed to be done next. The details of what was arranged between them are not fully preserved, but the outcome is clear enough. Rom was placed in the Moonside Lake, and the worst of the red moon's truth was pushed back behind her barrier. The eldritch reality that the full descent would have imposed on the remaining citizens of Yharnam was obscured, held at a distance by the same silence that had made Rom seem like a failure. What Willem had called useless turned out to be exactly the right tool for a situation no one had planned for. Bergenworth and its surrounding forest were sealed off entirely. Forbidden ground. The password to enter was kept by a scholar of Bergenworth, someone who understood precisely what was being protected and what would happen if it was not. The password itself, "Fear the Old Blood," was the core tenet of Master Willem and his scholars at Bergenworth. It was a warning spoken by a man who had foreseen what the old blood would do when it reached the wrong hands, or even the right ones. The cooperation between Bergenworth and the church in this arrangement was born not from trust, but from shared terror at what they had already unleashed. When the hunter finally destroys Rom, the veil tears. Queen Yharnam's apparition appears at the moonside lake, weeping before a blood moon that drops rapidly from the sky as Murgo's crying fills the air. The instructions that follow leave no ambiguity. Ritual secret broken. Seek the nightmare newborn. Everything that steered the hunter to this point, every step of the hunt up to this moment, was aimed at removing the one thing standing between Yharnam and the full descent of the eldritch truth. Rom held that back for longer than most of Yharnam knew there was anything to hold back. And when she fell, the city felt it immediately. And now, to the question that runs beneath Rom's entire story. There is a body on the altar of despair that looks almost exactly like Rom. Gray and still, seemingly dead, it sits atop the altar before which Ebrietas kneels in what can only be described as mourning. That image alone would be enough to prompt questions. But the connections between Rom and Ebrietas run deeper than proximity. Ebrietas is named after a butterfly. Her larval form, as a caterpillar, resembles Rom with an almost uncanny precision. Rom is called a spider, but looks like a caterpillar. The blood that runs from Rom's head when struck is the same color as Ebrietas' own blood. Both are encountered passively, neither hostile until disturbed. Both use arcane attacks. The kin are described as kin of the cosmos, and Rom drops kin cold blood on death, the same cold blood that links the kin to Ebrietas by name. The umbilical cord retrieved from imposter Yesafka adds another layer. The cord of an infant Great One grants an audience with the Great One to whom it belongs. Willem sought exactly such a cord to elevate his being and thoughts. If that cord was used in Rom's ascension, then it belonged to Rom, which would make Rom the infant Great One in question. And if Rom is the infant Great One whose cord Willem carried, then the body on the altar of despair is hers. Ebrietas kneels before her dead child in a place built to reverse the flow of time, hoping for something the altar might return. Rom, by this reading, was one of those special children drawn to a Great One who had lost its own. Chosen by Ebrietas, elevated through Willem's experiments, and the cord of Kos, ascending into something that even Ebrietas may not have fully anticipated. A child who went so far in her crossing that she came back unrecognizable, silent, sealed behind a lake, holding a barrier no one else could hold. And Ebrietas, left behind once more, kneels before what remains of her and mourns and waits. she was left behind. That is where her story begins, and in many ways, it is where it never stops. Among all the great ones with any presence in Yharnam, Ebrietta's is the only one who chose to remain close to humanity, who offered something of herself willingly, who stayed when others did not. And what that choice cost her is written into every corner of what she became. She is a monstrous thing to look upon. Her body resembles a great slug, tentacles rising from her back like the limbs of something dredged from a depth with no name. Her face is split, covered in growths that look almost fungal, surrounding a head that sits exposed and vulnerable at the center of all that strangeness. She has no visible mouth, only red flesh where one might expect to find one. Her eyes are green and oval, unlike the bulging yellow eyes common to the kin. And she has wings, skeletal and limited, enough to lift her, but not enough to carry her far. She originates from the land of Iz, a place buried in the deepest reaches of the Chalice dungeon labyrinth, said to exist in contact with the cosmos itself. The records leave open the question of her origin. Was she always a great one, or did she ascend from Thumerian roots? What is known is that, when the healing church eventually found her, she gave them her blood. Freely. As the only great one known to have actively sought closeness with humanity, she offered herself as a bridge between what humans were and what the great ones represented. The church built the choir around her, a faction dedicated to her study and her protection. They used her blood for their rituals, for the practice of blood ministration that spread through Yharnam and shaped its people in ways that could not be undone. But as time passed, the church stopped treating her as something sacred and started treating her as something useful. The giving became taking. The worship became use. For a time, the church could only reach her partially through phantasms, small, slug-like creatures from the labyrinth that serve as channels to the great ones. Through them, they learned to summon fragments of her across the distance. A rift would open, and her tentacles would come through, severed by the crossing. It is difficult not to read that image as a description of their entire relationship. A piece of something vast, offered up, and then cut off. To make proper contact, the elite of the healing church pursued a more direct path. Their journey began with the Great Is Chalice, a ritual object recovered from the labyrinth that unlocked the legendary land of Iz. It was there that the church's highest-ranking members, an elite faction who would become known as the choir, finally stood before her in full. But what they found was not the triumphant gateway to the cosmos they had anticipated. The truth Ebrietta's carried was a heavy one. The other great ones had departed long ago, leaving her behind. She was not a guide to their location, but irrefutable proof of their absence. This shocking discovery, however, led to an unexpected alliance. Ebrietta's and the choir realized they wanted the same thing. Both were searching for what had been lost, reaching for a greatness that had moved beyond their grasp. The choir garb speaks to this directly. Together with the left behind Great One, they looked to the skies. She tolerated humanity's proximity because she needed them as much as they needed her. The The epiphany that drove the subsequent search came suddenly. The choir declared that the cosmos were not some impossibly distant expanse of stars, but something far closer. The sky and the cosmos are one, close enough to touch, if only the mind could be made large enough to reach. To pursue this ambition, the choir founded the orphanage. Its name suggested care, but delivered only exploitation. The children taken there, having no one to speak for them, became ideal subjects. They would become, in the church's words, potent unseen thinkers, minds reshaped in service of a cosmic ambition they were never asked to share. The experiments that followed were numerous. They attempted to use Ebrietta's phantasms to breach the cosmos, and produced instead a small, dangerous exploding star. They built a bell to project arcane sound across planes of existence, hoping to reach the great ones through resonance. That, too, failed. The brain suckers may also be a remnant of this period, creatures whose skulls were opened and phantasms inserted, sent in search of insight. Each attempt pushed further. None arrived. Eventually, the choir turned fully to the children of the orphanage. Using blood collected from Ebrietta's, they transformed their subjects into celestial emissaries, beings created to serve as living bridges to the cosmos. Their heads swelled with eyes, and they emitted sounds like signals searching for a receiver. Yasofka, working within this same framework, used old blood drawn from Ebrietta's to achieve the same result with those sent to her clinic, turning them into kin of the cosmos. Ebrietta's bleeds two kinds of blood. The red fluid she spits carries frenzy, burning the minds of those it touches. The other is pale and serum-like, the kind that links her to the kin and a vast number of creatures across Yharnam. When a hunter first finds her, she is at the altar of despair, prostrated before something. Sleeping, perhaps. Mourning, more likely. Because Ebrietta's, like every great one, lost her child. The celestial children scattered through the upper cathedral ward are almost certainly her spawn, carried to term by human women whose blood had been suffused with hers. Ariana's story suggests the process. Blood administered through the church, with the descent of the blood moon as the moment of conception. Atop the altar of despair sits a still gray figure that resembles Ram, the vacuous spider. As explored earlier, this connection runs deeper than mere proximity. The name Ebrietta's belongs to a butterfly whose larval form mirrors Ram's shape, suggesting that the vacuous spider is not a separate being, but an earlier stage of the same kind of great one. The creature on the altar was her child, dead before it could become what she is. And so she stayed beside it in a place called despair, unwilling to leave. The ultimate success of the choir's grand project is cast into doubt by the orphanage itself. Imposter Yasofka was still attempting the same rituals when the night of the hunt descended, still using the same methods, still searching. For all the experiments and transformations and pale blood spilled, neither Ebrietta's nor the humans who bound themselves to her ever quite arrived. They found each other, and in the end, that may have been all there was to find. was born into grief. That is the first thing to understand about it, and perhaps the most important. Kos was a great one who washed ashore at a fishing hamlet long before the night of the hunt, already deep in the late stages of carrying a child. She died before that child could be born. And so, the orphan came into existence inside a corpse, in a place it had never chosen, under a dark sun it had never seen, with nothing waiting for it but loss. When it finally tears itself free, it looks up at the sky of the nightmare and cries. That image is difficult to set aside. A creature of tremendous power, weeping the moment it arrives in the world. Its mouth is locked in a permanent grin that has nothing to do with joy. It screams relentlessly, as though rage and grief arrived together and never separated. It wields its own placenta as a weapon, swinging it like a club, or tearing pieces from it to hurl as explosive projectiles. It fights with the frantic energy of something that has already lost everything. The villagers of the hamlet had treated Kos as a mother. Her corpse drew genuine reverence, and the parasites that teemed through it, phantasms unlike any found in ordinary creatures, were harvested carefully. This bond was real, and it ran deep, bringing about transformations the villagers understood as a kind of rebirth. Then Bergenworth came. Willem's scholars arrived searching for knowledge and power, specifically the umbilical cord of a great one. What they found was a village of fisherfolk who had built their lives around something sacred. The hunters who accompanied them were armed for beasts, not people. When the villagers resisted, the hunters answered with a brutal, misplaced force. They violated the corpse of Kos, and the village chanters carry the memory of what happened in the only way such a wound survives, repeated endlessly. Mother is dead, her baby taken. The orphan was torn from its mother's body. Its potential for life was stolen by hands that saw it only as a means to an end. What followed was not simply a curse born from human anger. The nightmare that rose from those events belongs to Kos, or to the orphan, or perhaps to both. It is their answer, written in the fabric of a place where hunters are drawn to relive the sins that made them. The villagers' suffering is part of it, woven into the nightmare's foundations. But the source runs deeper, reaching up to wherever Kos resides now. As Mikolash asked, "Ah, Kos, or some say Cosm, do you hear our prayers?" Perhaps she does. Perhaps the nightmare itself is the proof. As for the orphan that haunts it, its nature remains uncertain. The real child was most likely taken by the scholars, its ultimate fate unknown. But the orphan in the nightmare may be more than an echo. The nature of great ones does not submit to simple explanation. What looks like a manifestation may carry a real soul, and what appears to be a memory may be something still alive in a form human understanding cannot hold. German and Maria are strongly implied to have been the hunters who committed the act, making them the origin of a sin that every hunter thereafter inherited. Simon, the harrowed, understood what the nightmare was built from.
Do you know why the hunters are drawn to this nightmare? Because it sprouted from their very misdeeds. Things that some would rather keep secret. This village is the true secret. Testament to the old sins. It feeds this hunter's nightmare. Please, bring to an end the horror. So our forefathers sinned. We hunters cannot bear their weight forever.
When a hunter finally allows the orphan's spirit to reach the ocean, something shifts. The villagers find a measure of peace. The curse releases its hold. The orphan finds the rest it should have had long before anyone laid hands on its mother. It was born weeping into a world that had already taken everything from it, and it spent every moment of its existence in the nightmare, making sure that was known. There is a pram in the lunarium, and from it, the sound of a baby crying. Murgo is never seen. No shape, no form, no presence that a hunter can look at directly. Only the cry, persistent and raw, filling the nightmare of Mensis with something that sits between sorrow and distress. A sound that pulled the blood moon closer. A sound that has been going on, unanswered, for longer than most of the living can account for. But before speaking of the child, one must speak of the mother. Queen Yharnam was the queen of the ancient Thumerian civilization, and it is from her that the city takes its name. She appears in a white dress, heavily bloodstained, a veil drawn across her face that she removes when the hunter finds her in the nightmare of Mensis. Beneath it, black eyes with no pupils, skin like something long dried out, the face of a woman who has been carrying grief so long it has become part of her appearance. The blood on her dress is not from battle. The stains speak of something far more specific. Murgo was taken from her before birth, drawn out of her womb against her will, her hands chained so she could not stop it. The dress that was once white tells that story without a single word. There is no record of how the birth went wrong, or who was responsible for it. What remains is the aftermath of that act. Yharnam is seen after Ram falls, standing in the waking city beneath the red moon. She is seen again in the nightmare of Mensis, standing outside the cathedral where her child's cry echoes. There are those who believe that her grief, ancient, unresolved, reaches outward, shaping the city into something that reflects it. A world bending around loss that has never been answered. When the hunter encounters her in the Thumeru Eyehill Chalice dungeon, she is still pregnant. The fight takes place somewhere outside the normal flow of time, a moment preserved in the labyrinth before the wound was opened. Her dress begins white and becomes bloodier as the battle continues, the staining happening before the hunter's eyes. Her hands start bound. She breaks free. She draws a dagger, and when she is close to falling, she soaks it in her own blood until it becomes something closer to a sword. Throughout all of it, the child in her womb cries, capable of stunning anyone who strikes her too many times, as though even unborn, it is trying to protect her. She is not the villain of this story. She is its first victim. After the wet nurse falls, and Murgo returns to sleep, if the hunter goes back to where Yharnam stood, she bows. A slow, quiet gesture of gratitude, and then she is gone. Whether the hunter freed her child or avenged it, she recognizes what was done and acknowledges it. That bow is the closest thing to peace that this part of the story offers anyone. Now, to the child itself. Murgo is most likely the offspring of Yharnam and formless Odin, whose nature made the conception already something beyond ordinary understanding. The child did not survive the womb, or at least its body did not. What remained was a consciousness, infantile and unformed, existing without physical presence. Awake enough to cry, but not developed enough to do anything else. Special children draw great ones toward them. Murgo's cry, emanating from within the nightmare, pulled the blood moon lower over Yharnam and set in motion everything the school of Mensis had been reaching toward. They conducted a ritual to gain an audience, to receive what Mikolash called eyes on the inside, a means of ascending beyond the limits of human thought. What they received instead was the collapse of their own minds. The nightmare of Mensis is Murgo's domain. The attendants that wander its halls, the jesters and wide-bodied maids, the winter lanterns singing something tuneless that might be a lullaby. All of it forms a household arranged around the child. Everything in that place exists in relation to the pram. And then there is the wet nurse. Murgo's wet nurse is one of the strangest presences in all of Yharnam, and the strangeness begins with how little the world seems to know about it. No text names it before the encounter. No character speaks of it. It simply drops from the sky when a hunter approaches the pram, folds its wings over the child, and silences the crying. Where it comes from is genuinely unclear. Its appearance carries something Thumerian about it, despite its inhuman proportions. A long, black, hooded dress, strange jewels, the bearing of something that belongs to a court. Its weapons echo Gurman's burial blade, forged of siderite, a mineral said to come from the heavens themselves. There is nothing visible beneath its hood. When struck, it does not bleed, only releases a vapor-like substance. It can duplicate itself, filling the space around the pram with copies that appear and vanish. It may be an apparition entirely, something called into being rather than something that simply exists and waits. One reading is this: Murgo, existing without a body, reached outward and made something in response to its own distress. A protector, a presence to stand over it, something to make the world quieter. When the wet nurse falls, the crying returns and then gradually softens. Murgo goes back to sleep. A queen whose child was torn from her before it ever drew breath. A child crying in a nightmare, perhaps of its own making, protected by something shaped from that need. And a city that may reflect the weight of that loss. There is a particular kind of weight in that, even for a great one. And yet it is worth pausing on what the hunter actually does here. The gentler reading is that Murgo is put to rest, returned to the sleep it was denied, and that Queen Yharnam's bow is a gesture of relief Yharnam is not a city that has earned gentle readings. A hunter who cuts down everything in their path, putting a crying child to rest and slaying it, are not so different in practice. The outcome looks the same from the outside. Since nothing here is certain, it is perhaps better to believe the kinder version of events. That Murgo sleeps. That the Queen found something close to peace, even if the city itself seems determined to prove otherwise. Every other great one has a body, a shape, something that can be seen, approached, and in the end, killed. Odin has none of these things. He exists as presence alone, a voice without a throat, an influence without a form, moving through the world in ways that leave traces everywhere and a figure nowhere. How he arrived at this state is a matter of layered speculation. The great ones, as a kind, exist on a plane higher than any other race that came before or after them. Odin somehow climbed higher still, ascending beyond even his own kind to a plane where the need for physical existence simply fell away. He never had to have a body because he surpassed the conditions that make a body necessary. Whether this was a deliberate act or simply what happened when something old enough and powerful enough keeps moving upward is not something the record clarifies. And yet Odin has a tomb. That detail sits strangely alongside everything else about him. A tomb implies a death, and a death implies a body, and a body implies something Odin is not supposed to have. The Yharnam stone offers a way of holding that contradiction without resolving it entirely. The Queen lies dead, but her horrific consciousness is only asleep, and it stirs in unsettling motions. Death, by this reading, is not the end of existence for beings of sufficient elevation. The Is chalice suggests the great ones are capable of functioning on transcendental planes of thought that ordinary minds cannot access. Odin may have died in whatever sense that word applies to something formless, and simply continued on a different plane, because the plane he occupies has no use for the kind of ending that death usually represents. He is the only great one the record explicitly names as male. All others are female, or exist beyond any gender the human world has language for. Odin is most likely the father of Murgo. His union with Queen Yharnam, the Thumerian queen, produced the child whose crying would eventually pull the blood moon over the city and set the events of the hunt in motion. The umbilical cord collected from Ariana's child speaks to this directly, and to how Odin operates in the world without ever appearing in it. Every great one loses its child and then yearns for a surrogate. And Odin, the formless great one, is no different. To think it was corrupted blood that began this eldritch liaison. Blood is Odin's medium. Without a body of his own, he exists and moves and acts through blood, particularly the precious blood that flows through those connected to him. Both Odin and those who unknowingly carry his runes seek that blood, though most of them could not explain why. A chapel in the cathedral ward stands dedicated to him, and the citizens who worship there, whether they understand what they are worshiping or simply feel drawn to it, are participating in something older than the city around them. Ariana's situation points to how Odin reaches into the world. Her blood, exchanged through her work, her distant lineage tracing back to Queen Annalise of Cainhurst, made her a vessel through which something formless could act. The child she eventually gives birth to carries the mark of that contact. He moves through what already flows between people, through the blood that Yharnam built its entire civilization around, present in the transaction without ever being visible in it. That is perhaps the most unsettling thing about him. Every other great one can be found, faced, and in some sense understood through what the encounter reveals. Odin cannot be encountered at all. He leaves children and worshippers and runes and a tomb, and he is never there when anyone looks. An unseen power is at work in Yharnam, a great one that manipulates events from behind the scenes. This entity, called the Moon Presence by some, is the likely creator of the hunter's dream, and the force behind the blood moon that hangs over the city. Its influence is the catalyst for much of the world's suffering, making it the central force behind this long, dark night. There is a name whispered in the hunter's dream, spoken by the doll in her quiet prayer. Flora. Whether that name belongs to the Moon Presence is not certain, but the prayer itself says enough. O Flora of the moon of the dream, O fleeting will of the ancients, let the hunter be safe, let him find comfort, and let this dream, his captor, foretell a pleasant awakening. A captor being prayed to for the safety of the one it holds. That tension sits at the center of everything the Moon Presence is, and everything it might be. It is the Great One most synonymous with the blood moon itself. Whether it lives on the moon, or whether it is the moon given flesh, is once again not known. What is known is that when the blood moon descends over Yharnam, the Moon Presence descends with it. And the moon in Yharnam is not the distant, cold thing of ordinary skies. It sits within the atmosphere itself, so low that clouds pass behind it, close enough to feel like a presence rather than something remote and unreachable. The Moon Presence may be exactly that, a physical form for something otherwise abstract, the moon made into a being that can act and reach and want. Its body is built from flesh and bone, with the exception of its head, which carries no face, only a hole where one should be. Tentacles spread from it, resembling hair, and tail, and beneath them the structure of a large human spine and rib cage. It looks like something that assembled itself out of humanity without fully understanding the shape it was reaching for. And yet that shape is not accidental. The beasts that the scourge produces, the scourge beasts and silver beasts that fill the waking world and the nightmares carry the same qualities back in their own forms. Proximity to a great one shapes the living things around it, pulling them toward its own image. The same phenomenon appears at the fishing hamlet, where the villagers, and especially the snail women, came to physically resemble Kas, whose phantasms and blood had moved through their lives for generations. The moon presence is the master of Gurman, the first hunter and the creator of the hunter's dream. Gurman did not stumble into that arrangement. The umbilical cord found in the workshop suggests he invited the moon presence in, broken by the loss of Lady Maria, reaching for something that might answer a grief too large to carry alone. What answered that reaching bound him to the dream without release, and Gurman has spent every moment since treating that binding as a nightmare he cannot wake from. He called the moon close when he should not have, and the moon never left. A note left in the hunter's dream makes the stakes of this arrangement plain. Halt the source of the spreading scourge of beasts, lest the night carry on forever. And Gurman himself, after the fall of Father Gascoigne, offers his own quiet warning. The moon is close. It will be a long hunt tonight. These two lines together describe the world the moon presence has created, and the world the hunters exist to manage. The dream itself is the moon presence's instrument. Through it, hunters are drawn in, strengthened, sent out to hunt beasts, and gradually shaped into something closer to what the moon presence needs them to be. Because the moon presence, like every great one, has lost its child. And the hunt, for all its brutality, is at its core a search for a surrogate. A strong enough hunter, suffused with enough blood echoes, pulled close enough to the nature of a great one, becomes a candidate for that role. This is what the hunters truly are at their deepest level. Echo fiends. Beings who consume the echoes, the will of ancient blood, growing more like a great one with every hunt, every death, every return to the dream. Gurman was the first surrogate candidate. Every hunter who came after inherited the same function without being told what it was. Most hunters fail. The old blood claims them, and they become the very beasts they were sent to hunt, more dangerous and more lost than anything they started as. But there are those with pale blood in their veins, hunters who resist the scourge where others collapse. The doll herself is filled with pale blood. Hunters come to her to grow stronger, and in doing so are drawn closer in essence, and eventually in appearance, to the great ones themselves. These are the ones the dream was built to produce. The blood moon and the scourge of beasts are bound together. Two readings of this relationship exist, and neither can be entirely dismissed. The first, more unsettling reading is that the moon presence is the source of humanity itself, and that the beast within people is something it placed there, an original condition rather than a corruption. The second, and more grounded reading, is that the beast lies dormant in all humans, present but contained, that it is only when old blood enters the equation and the blood moon draws close that the dormancy breaks and the transformation takes hold. It remains unanswered if the moon presence causes the scourge deliberately, or if its proximity simply activates what the old blood has already seeded. What is known is that this pattern is ancient. Long before present-day Yharnam, the blood moon appeared over Lauren, and the same scourge followed. Queen Yharnam's special child drew the moon presence near, and that nearness, combined with old blood distributed among the Thumerian population, triggered the transformation. When the child died in the womb, the moon may have retreated, and the scourge subsided for a time. Then the scholars of Bergenworth rediscovered old blood in the tombs below Yharnam. The healing church distributed it across the city. The school of Mensis woke Murgo's crying consciousness through their ritual, and the whole cycle turned again. The same sequence, playing out in a different age, with different hands, and the same result. There is also a note found in the lecture hall hinting that the moon presence may be actively seeking out and eliminating other great ones for reasons no one has been able to fully explain. But it adds another layer to a being already difficult to read cleanly. This is where the name Flora becomes meaningful in a different way. Flora, in the language of living things, refers to the colonies of beneficial presence within a body that protect it from infection. The cells that fight what does not belong. And there is a reading of the moon presence that places it in exactly that role. A great one who stayed when the others left, who felt something for humanity when the rest ascended beyond caring, who built the hunter's dream and the system of pale blood hunters not to exploit humanity, but to protect it, sending her enforcers out into the night to cut down the beasts before they consume everything. In this reading, the pale blood hunters are the immune response. The beasts are the infection. And Flora watches from the dream through Gurman, waiting for the night to end and the sun to return to Yharnam. The Yharnam sunrise ending, where the hunter is released from the dream into a morning that actually arrives, would be the true resolution of that purpose. The hunt is finished. The infection is cleared. Flora and Gurman release the hunter back into a world where the sun shines. A second ending sees Gurman freed at last, and the hunter remaining with Flora, ready to bring new pale blood hunters when the next scourge rises. Both of these carry a quiet completeness to them. Gurman does not experience any of it that way. To him, the dream is a prison, Flora a monster that keeps him there. And from inside a cage, it is genuinely difficult to see the intentions of the hand that built it. But Gurman understands that cage better than anyone. He knows what it does to those who are bound to it, what it takes, and what it never gives back. And so, when he offers the hunter his mercy, it is not simply an ending. It is an act of protection. He will not allow them to become what he is. This prison is his alone. When the hunter refuses Gurman's mercy and defeats him, the moon presence descends and reaches for the hunter in a gesture that looks almost like an embrace. It wants to take the hunter as its surrogate, its new child, its replacement for what it lost long ago. If the hunter has consumed the umbilical cords of past great ones, they can resist that embrace, and in resisting it, they become something new. Something that was once human and is no longer entirely so. A great one born from a hunt, ascending to what Master Willem spent his life reaching for and never arrived at. This is the first true ascension born not of study or ritual, but of the hunt itself. The culmination of what an entire civilization reached toward without ever attaining. If they cannot resist, they become what Gurman was. Bound, useful, loved, perhaps, in whatever way the moon presence loves anything, but not free. And if they defeat the moon presence entirely, Flora is gone. The dream burns. The system built to protect Yharnam from itself collapses with its architect. What the hunter gains in that moment is real. What the world loses in the same moment may be greater than any single ascension is worth. That is the quiet cruelty at the heart of the secret ending. The greatest act of individual elevation in Yharnam's history may also be the thing that leaves the city most exposed to the dark, with no pale blood hunters left to answer the next night, and no dream left to make them. And with that, we have spoken of the last of them for tonight. The great ones, beings that weep and lose children and reach downward toward lesser things, yearning for surrogates. Gods that can be killed, mothers that grieve, a formless voice that fathers children it will never hold, a left-behind daughter kneeling before an altar in a place called despair. A crying child in a pram with no one but a conjured guardian to stand over it. A moon that may have stayed out of pity for a city it is slowly destroying. None of them are simple. That is perhaps the most honest thing that can be said about them. The night is still long over Yharnam. The beasts still walk its streets. The blood still flows through hands that do not fully understand what they are carrying. There is much left to speak of in this city, and we will return to it. There are hunters whose stories have not been told, and scholars whose ambitions have not been fully reckoned with, and a history that goes deeper than any lantern can illuminate in a single sitting. But that is for another night. For now, stay close to the warmth. Find whatever peace this city allows you, and rest well. The hunt can wait.